Now then, let's get things started. So on to our first session, where I'm delighted to introduce Nicky Spooner, the Senior Director of Agency and Brand Partnerships at PubMatic EMEA, who will be moderating this session. Welcome, Nicky, and over to you to introduce your panelists.
Thanks, Ryan, and hi, everyone. Great to see you joining us today. I'm thrilled to be moderating this panel around transparency and sustainability. So without further ado, I would like to welcome my panelists to join. We have Luca, Steffen, and Joe. I'm going to start with you, Luca. Would you mind introducing yourself and talking a bit about why transparency in the area of sustainability is so important to you in your day-to-day role and the company that you work in?
Absolutely. Hi, Nicky. By the way, my camera's not working for some reason. I'm not
sure
why.
It's fine.
Okay, great. That's fine. That works for me. So I'm Luca. Hi, everyone. Oh, sorry. Here we go. I think you should be able to see me now, hopefully. I'm Luca. I work at Microsoft on the Invest DSP business, and I look after brand partnerships in Northern Europe. I'm also chair on our internal sustainability committee at Microsoft, so it's definitely a passion point for me. And I guess that why sustainability is such a big deal here is that I guess transparent supply chains are really the only way that we can understand our true impact on the environment. I think we're only really just starting to beginning to scratch the surface, understand exactly what the impact is on the environment from our industry. I think one stat that sort of just jumped out at me from some paper that I read recently is that serving 1,000 impressions is the equivalent of one washing machine load in terms of CO2. So that's really piqued my interest, and since then I've been heavily involved. And then just as a company in general, Microsoft has a few pretty big pledges. 2030, we want to be carbon negative, and by 2050, we actually want to remove all the historical carbon emissions that we've emitted as a company ever. So that's essentially why I'm here.
Thank you. Steffen?
Hi all, great to be here. Thanks for the invitation. On the one hand side, I'm a sustainability lead for the Someone Entertainment Group, which is the advertising and media part of the ProSiebenSat.1 group in Germany. The main fields of sustainability work there is around green production, as we're also a big TV producer, optimization of ad tech and media deliveries, ensuring transparency and comparability with the two numbers, but also with social impact and publishing quality we are giving to the market. On the other hand side, I'm since the beginning of this year elected vice chair of the IMB Europe Sustainability Standards Committee. As the name of the committee suggests, we are developing their standards in the highly dynamic sustainability world, as we are seeing many regulations from the EU side and the big pressure also from Mother Nature. So there's a lot of needs we have to address, and in the committee we are facing this for and with as much parts of the industry we can get into the discussion.
Fabulous, thank you. And Joe?
Thanks, Nicky, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. I'm Joe. I work for GroupM Nexus in our global accounts team. So I work with the GroupM agency, global advertisers, building basically global programmatic strategy. Obviously, as part of that, we've become aware of the impact of big global programmatic executions on the environment. It's a big topic now that we're speaking to, obviously, advertisers about how we can help mitigate and address this. I think, I was thinking about what this means for my day-to-day, and I think it's quite, probably before to address that, is what does sustainability almost mean to me at a personal level? And I've found, as we've been talking a lot more about it probably over the past year, that immediate thought when you start to talk about sustainability, is this just a tack on to something else? And I've definitely found there's a bit of, every time you talk about it, that you get that response a bit from people, and you're just adding this on because you think it can help you sell something, or it's a nice little hook. And I really think for me, sustainability is breaking that dynamic. Everything we do in our day-to-day, in business produces stuff, right? Produces emissions. Growth is linked to emissions. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. For me, in terms of what I do on my day-to-day about helping global advertisers buy ads, for me, it really means how can we help them buy fewer, better ads, and addressing that macro piece. I think is key for us to addressing this challenge.
Absolutely. And I think actually that segues quite nicely into the next question. I might pass over to you first for that, actually, Joe, because I think given the experience, the breadth of experience on this panel alone, the different vantage points that you have in this kind of digital chain of events, as you say, to driving advertising campaigns and growth for businesses, there's a lot being talked about, but are we seeing the importance and the learnings in this area actually translating into RFPs from businesses that you're working with? And what's that look like from your point of view, Joe?
Yeah, I think what Luca mentioned, I think we're still in very early days. Every client is asking, how can I buy more sustainably? I guess the question is then, how do you do that? There's obviously advancements, I think, in technology measurement and data around being able to better measure the carbon impact of running advertising. I think we need to be careful not to talk about reducing wastage yet by using those data sets. It's more, for me, measurement, understanding, can we start to think about baselines? I think in saying that, where we're trying to focus then is maybe a shift away from how we've conceived performance about maximizing volume in media and understanding what is the optimal level of media to deliver on a set outcome. Doing a lot of work around understanding the relation between how many impressions or what's a baseline level impression to deliver a completed view, for instance, and then using that to index how we buy. I'd say that's not going far enough, because there's a question about, well, is a view actually, how valuable is a view? So I do see a bit of a convergence here with some new measurement around attention and being able to understand the qualitative impact of an ad placement through attention, and then potentially being able to better model that to, I would say, better outcomes around awareness or sales that actually matter to a brand, and then modeling that against carbon. So I think we've got a long way to go. I think people are asking the right questions. It is a real learning journey. We need more data, we need more measurement, and I do think we need a bit of a shift in mindset about how we prioritize media buying.
Absolutely. And I like what you said about measurement, but it sounds like from your kind of seat, you're starting to see this research happening and you're starting to see inquiries coming through. But from your side, Luca, what are you witnessing? What's happening with the campaigns and the RFPs that you're seeing?
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of what Joe just said definitely rings true. I think there's a fairly inconsistent approach to sustainability just as a priority from a lot of our buyers. So I work on the DSP side, I get a lot of brand RFPs. On some of the RFPs, you'll have a sentence which is essentially feels like a tick box. And on some, there's been a clear thought process behind a whole paragraph or a set of questions asking about measurement and what you can provide. So definitely like disparate ways of dealing with it from the brand side. But in terms of what we can actually do today, I think, again, echoing what Joe said, I think integrating with some of the sustainability tech or sus tech, I'm not sure if that's a thing, maybe it will be, with some of the green vendors to basically activate just green segments and target domains that have been rated as climate friendly is one thing you can start to do, maybe on our platform, and I think on quite a few others. And I think we'd take active steps to integrate some of the...
Oh, I think we might be losing Luca a little bit there. Okay, in that case, I'll pass over to you, Steffen. Is there anything that you would add to that kind of question?
Yeah, sure. We are seeing lots of impact and pressure now from the supply chain is coming more and more in. We on publisher side, we have, of course, many ratings and questionnaires. For example, from the GroupM, there's the Vendor Explorer or the IPG Media Responsibility Guide. There are new players from directly out of the industry, like Scope 3 or Impact Plus, bringing in new measurements and opportunities for advertisers to get an idea of transparency or a better idea. We are also seeing players from the wider environmental field, for example, CDP or EcoVadis, at the end also DI, which are coming closer to the industry and getting their stake of the supply chain. And at the end, also financial players from the financial reporting side, like ISS, ESG, or Sustainalytics, which are getting more and more included by also advertisers or agencies in the evaluation of the media market. The end of the story will be somehow ESG will be one KPI. So from my perspective, definitely one KPI for media delivery.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can imagine that you're probably right on that. Sorry, Luca, we lost you a little bit there, but I'll come back to you actually to get your thoughts on what you're seeing in terms of practice among publishers. And if you would call out any work from any particular publishers where you think, there's some really good impact happening.
Absolutely. I think there's just from the publisher, there's definitely been increasing interest in or just openness in working with sustainable tech vendors and green vendors. I think that to get baseline measure of performance and actual emissions on the publisher side is something new. And again, like varying interest, but on the whole, we're trending upwards. One way I think that we've seen some of our publishers' work is essentially decreasing the number of SSPs that they're working with. So it's essentially consolidating to reduce duplication, to basically declutter the supply chain, because that's what's causing these emissions. And I think that consolidation is good from an environmental perspective, but again, I think defining sustainability, it's not just environmental, it's also economic, it's also social. And I think that sort of duplication, the reason it's there is because it's good for publishers, right? It's financially there's an incentive to doing that. And also I think this consolidation, we've got to be careful with consolidating onto largely like bigger publishers, and that could potentially pose risk to maybe smaller, more nimble publishers. There's D&I aspects there that we need to take into consideration. So there's some of the things that we're doing, but I guess just more of a rounded approach to sustainability is also needed.
Absolutely. And I think you were mentioning that in our kind of pre-session chat, weren't you, Steffen, about the ESG, not just being about the E, but also there's a focus to be put on maybe the other letters there.
And most of the time we're discussing actually in the media market, sustainability is focused on ecological part and CO2 reduction, carbon reduction, which is totally fair. And nevertheless, you all know in the internet there are also social impact is interacting with, at the end, ecological impact. For it, the best example I think is always the MFAs, or the made for advertising pages, which we see really bad performing regarding ecological efficiency. And furthermore, they are somehow intransparent in the long tail somewhere, and probably also one of the main drivers of disinformation and social complications at the end. So from the publishing side, this is something we see probably also as a good part for the industry, and that this kind of challenges are becoming under sustainability spotlights a new twist and a more important role. And at the end, you mentioned, I think, Luca, also tech providers to take Scope 3. They just delivered a few weeks ago, a month already, their findings that if you exclude ecological inefficient pages, you will have at the end you will find a more efficient and effective surrounding for your media campaigns.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot to think about in everything that you said, and your view, as I say, you're viewing from different seats in this chain of events almost. But I suppose that's where this next question is so interesting, because there's so much to consider and so many moving parts involved. Where does the responsibility ultimately sit when it comes to driving change here, when it comes to actual action and also the transparency around that? I'm going to go to you again, Steffen, start.
Sure. I think regarding sustainability, we are all responsible. It's easy to point to others, to advertisers or to publishers, as we are the most closest to the consumer. But nevertheless, at the end, if everyone is doing their own homework and is going to drive transparency regarding their own responsibility, there's no need for finger pointing. I think the most easiest way would be, and the way with not that many estimations as we have in the market right now, in this case, would be if everyone is taking care of their own stake. It's called Scope 1 and 2 regarding the greenhouse gas emissions. The Scope 3 is the part which is beside your own really capable responsibility in your company, and the upstream and the downstream parts you have in the moment you have to estimate them in the moment, and this is fair and good to get a better understanding of the whole market. But the best way at the end is always regarding sustainability. Start on your own side and then tend your scope step by step.
Yeah, absolutely. Joe, I can see you nodding. Would you agree with Steffen on that, or is there anything you'd add to it?
Yeah, no, I echo massively what Steffen just said. I think if we're all honest, the ad ecosystem, so all those little layers that we're talking about, is probably in a bit of an unhealthy state. So I think probably the best course of action is to look at initially, where you sit within that chain, what's your impact, can you address it? And then being a lot more collaborative with how you work across different stakeholders. I think especially around, if you think about programmatic, the fragmentation of that marketplace across both demand and supply, ability to understand and measure ad effectiveness, which obviously links to carbon as well. So I think starting to think, I think as Steffen said, how can you fix your impact, and then taking a more collaborative approach, I think, to other stakeholders, because ultimately this is bigger than business. We're not going to sell, if we don't fix this, we're not going to be able to sell anything to anybody in 30 years potentially. I know that's probably a bit drastic, but this is something for us to sell together and be a lot more collaborative rather than finger pointing.
Yeah, what you said there about thinking about the impact you can have in the space that you're sat in, and then looking around you to see where there are collaboration opportunities for sure. From your point of view, Luca, is that something that you're seeing already? Is that something that you think is true? Yeah,
and I think actually because we're in a fairly unique position and sitting across the whole ecosystem, we've got the buy side, the sell side, we get that like overall view of the supply chain. And I think because that supply chain is the real issue and everyone is in that supply chain, I totally agree with both panelists that it's on everyone. And I think we've seen from industry articles that I've been reading that like 60% of the emissions come from the actual like ad selection on the publisher side, so actually the inserting of the ad. But then again, the brand is the ultimate gatekeeper of budget. That's the only money in the programmatic supply chain. So actually, in terms of leverage, the brand could potentially put pressure on where that budget is going and how it's being spent. But then equally in the middle, you got agencies and platforms that I think have the duty to both educate and implement on this stuff. I think from a buying platform perspective, I think some of the points that I didn't cover earlier because of my connection, apologies, but that's slotting quite nicely here is that some of the quick wins that you could do from just the buying platform are things like what Steffen mentioned around MFA blocking, so made for advertising sites that are just those horrible, like sort of spammy pages with a million ads. And those are not only awful for user experience, the emissions on average from those pages are 13% higher. They're just pretty bad all around. So I think cutting those out is a really quick and easy win. Other things you can do from a buying perspective is creative purging from platforms, removing inefficient partners from supply chains, and just even more advanced to this, the responsibility is everyone, but on the buy side, you can also do things like curation, and some of the things that you can do with curating your own essentially green marketplace are super interesting. I think in a few years, I think that will be where the industry goes towards, but curating green marketplaces and green inventory packaged up in a completely transparent system where transparency is core, being able to basically police that supply chain, I think is the future of where we're going, hopefully.
Yeah, I like some of the examples that you raised there, actually, because there are so many different levers that can be pulled to, as you mentioned, make quick wins really and have an impact immediately. But given the seat that you're sat in, Joe, and all of the stakeholders you have to manage and all the levers that you've got to pull, when you're building out partnerships with your clients and working with your agencies, for example, what are some of the kind of good, tangible examples like Luca's just surfaced that you can mention for the audience today?
Yeah, I think it links into a lot of what Steffen and Luca were saying probably a few minutes ago. I think from a GroupM standpoint, obviously a big impact in terms of buying media globally. And it is taking, I'd say, a holistic response to what is responsible content and being able to reward, I think, publishers. I know Luca made a point, a lot of the back end setups around ad calling is to help them monetize their media. So how can we as a buyer actually incentivize publishers who are doing the right thing around cleaning out the supply chain, cutting out made for advertising websites, not spreading disinformation about stuff like sustainability? How do we ensure we're still rewarding minority-owned publishers within that, and creating a framework around responsible journalism? I think that is something that GroupM, from an investment standpoint, is building out that framework so we can help reward the publishers who are doing the right thing, and hopefully that will help create a better ecosystem on the supply side. I think in terms of, I guess, day-to-day role around buying programmatic, it is looking at the things that sit within our supply chain around SBO, for instance. I know we work with Nicky and PubMatic around how can we create packages around pre-auction packages for low emission placements, making sure we can get APIs into companies like Scope 3 so we can actually start to measure and baseline, working with creative technologies that can the file size of ads. I think the other thing that we can probably do, I think, thinking of about what Luca was saying, from a measurement or KPI standpoint, I think we've probably got a responsibility, the agency side, to not accept bad briefs. Thinking about clicks as a metric, for instance, which I think we've all known for probably about 10 years. There's questions about the quality. There's how that opens out into kind of fraudulent bots, everything else that everybody knows about. We should be braver to push back on those briefs and actually put in better measurement that, again, rewards publishers who are delivering better high impact kind of placements, which should also deliver better performance, maybe at a higher cost, and have lower emissions. So it says, yeah, a lot of different things that are probably some are more macro and some are more the technical level. But I think you do need to look at kind of both scales, I think, to address the challenge.
Just tagging onto that point as well, I think that some of the initial research from some of these like big green vendors suggests that actually cutting out stuff like MFA actually is rewarded by not only lower emissions but actually better performance, and on the publisher side as well, it's leading to increasing revenue in some cases. So I think an education piece around that is also of worth, because I definitely didn't know that about 2 months ago. So
yeah, I think I think Scope 3 and Lumen or Playground Echoes data around that correlation between attention, which automatically cuts out bad placements, and MFA, better performance, lower emissions. So that, I think, education piece around quality, I think, is a really easy win, I think.
I would absolutely agree. And again, some really good examples of the work that's coming out of the group there, Joe. And from what you've said, it's not made easy, but I think it sounds as though there's good rigor around the measurement, benchmarking, a framework almost for teams to be thinking about when they're working with the different partners that they are. So that leads me to the next question, which is, as we look ahead, could actually the implementation of standardized policies benefit the industry in accelerating the agenda here? Do we think it would be helpful? I'm going to go to you first, Steffen, to comment.
Yeah, thank you. As Vice Chair of the Sustainability Standards Committee, I'd say yes, definitely. Nevertheless, I want to add to Joe and Luca, it isn't that easy. We have one of the working groups in the committees called Methodology and Frameworks. And there we are doing actually a gap analysis as we see the need of comparability in the market between the different ideas of frameworks or methodologies, or the so-called calculators. I would say they are estimators, because it's not sometimes it's not every part of the supply chain included, and it is not necessary that every estimator includes every part of the supply chain. Nevertheless, everyone in the supply chain needs an idea which is included and which part is not included, as if you're cutting out pieces of the supply chain, you'll see not that good comparability. We have some low-hanging fruits where you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So please take a look at the guide to sustainable media from the IAB Tech Lab in New York, or the guide to sustainable business decision making from the committee I'm leading with. or furthermore also from the GAM, from the WFA, Guide to Sustainability Media. There you'll find for every part of the industry, I think nowadays, really good low-hanging fruits. Nevertheless, you are good advised by not taking every number too serious in the moment, as the things are not in detail defined yet. So definitely we need more standards to get more closer to the reality around these numbers circulating actually in the sustainability environment.
Excellent. And Joe, what would you add to Steffan's thoughts?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything Steffen said. The thing I was thinking about in terms of this about standardization is like what is good when it comes to media. Really thinking about media auditing, procurement. That side of things is still so price driven. And I do feel like without addressing that link between how we audit what is good, which is obviously really important, in a way that's a bit more sophisticated than just looking at price, that can bring in other data points that link into sustainability or quality. And how can we connect that together with then, I guess, the changes we are starting to see on the more marketing side? Because there also, if we continue having that disconnect, there's always going to be, I guess, a tendency to have to account for low cost. And I know it's not as simple as buying more expensive media is going to address all of this, but we do need to find a more, as I said, nuanced way of measuring and auditing what is considered good media in this landscape together as an industry. Because I do worry if that isn't addressed, then some of the other things we're trying to do are going to be more difficult than they should.
It sounds as though you're both in agreement around the standardization of, as you say, the kind of measurement piece almost. But Luca, how useful would the standardization of those things and beyond be for you in your day-to-day?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be a massive help just in terms of all at a really sort of basic level, all the tech speaking same language across the supply chain so that you can more actively implement strategies and that sort of thing. But for me as well, what would be super useful is just benchmarking, sort of what Joe was saying around just getting a baseline level, like what actually is our emissions as a platform for this campaign, for this advertiser. Because at the moment, a lot of the challenges in some of the working groups that I'm involved in is we really want to improve things, but we have no way of measuring the improvement uplift at the moment. It's things that we know are better for the environment, but we can't quite quantify it yet. So I think that'll be, with standardization, I guess that would then be the next step. And that would be like gold dust really for improvements in programmatic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like what you say about everyone speaking the same language. I think that absolutely would be really useful.
Just adding to the benchmarks, I'm totally with you. You'll see behind every estimator, calculator, call it how you want it, there are some literature numbers, and they are somehow different. And we are not talking about a few percentage, sondern there are differences around about 200 to 300% somehow. And if you take your, 200 gram per 1,000 ad deliveries of carbon, you take the next literature, then you will go up to 600 grams for 1,000 ad deliveries. And if you're going to scale it up, you'll have extreme differences, and this is something we have to bridge. Definitely we have to get more, and that's what I mean if I say we have to get closer to the real numbers. And we need estimations for the moment, definitely on carbon, on corporate side and also on product side. Nevertheless, the numbers have to be better in the future.
Thank you. We've got 2 minutes, so in one sentence each of you, what's the one thing you want the audience to take away from our conversation today? So I'm going to kick off with you, Luca.
Cool. I'll be really quick. I think that there's loads of things that you can do straight away, even though potentially we can't measure it precisely today, but we know some of the things like the quick wins that we spoke about earlier are really easily implemented by a lot of people in the supply chain. Actually, transparency is key, and one of the ways to police that transparent supply chain is through using strategies like an integrated platform, inventory curation for more future-facing strategies. I think there's loads we can do today, basically.
Thank you. And Joe?
Sorry. Yeah, I think for me, it's can we orientate ourselves to thinking fewer, better ads as a starting point?
Great sentence. And Steffen?
as I mentioned earlier, start on your own side before finger pointing, especially around sustainability, as if you're louder to the outside and compared to the inside, it's somehow called probably greenwashing, and that's nobody. It's nobody around here I know who want to be addressed like this. So start with your own. There are many ways to start, get into the discussion, get a feeling of the differences, and yeah, bring in more people, more heads. It's not just not a unit more. It's a decentralized challenge you'll see if you're going further in your companies, and so you'll need lots of discussions. And yeah, thank you very much for listening today.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Nicky. Such a great conversation. A big thank you to you, Nicky, and also to Joe, Steffen, and of course, Luca, for joining us today. I think it's especially insightful to hear about the current status of sustainability practices within the digital ad buy. And we really appreciate you sharing your expertise on this, and hope the audience has some good takeaways on what we can expect in 2024.